This is the first of our TR Talks series. This is a conversation about health innovation, and it's intended to sort of start some of the dialogue, but also about building community and doing interesting things and learning from one another. We are proudly supported in part by the Connaught Global Challenge Award, and we are a collaboration between the Toronto Translational Hub, which was founded by the departments of psychiatry, medicine, medical imaging, surgery, and pediatrics. So just acknowledging the formal affiliations. And a product of the Translational Research Program, which is in the Department of Laboratory Medicine and Pathobiology, and the Health Innovation Hub. And I'm going to do a really quick pitch for some of the things that the Health Innovation Hub is doing. If you're interested, if you have ideas, concepts, we have a pitch coming up towards the end of October. Please, if you're interested, go to our website, h2i.utoronto.ca, read up on the details. We also have on November 4th coming up a networking event, Pillars of Health at JLabs. So if you're interested, come on out. So I want to, before I turn over the mic, I want to set sort of a little bit of context. What we were talking in the room a little bit before, and I think it's important that we sort of come to an understanding of what is innovation. Because translation, the way we define it in our program, is taking knowledge, research, discoveries, and moving between domains towards impact. It's applied research or applying research towards, it could be commercialization, but it could be many other things as well. But innovation is this word that's thrown around these days all the time. And sometimes, actually, I've found that people don't really agree on what they're talking about. So for the purpose of tonight, when we talk, we're going to define it very loosely. Innovation is essentially doing something differently than the status quo, that's better or in a new way that improves things. So translating research and knowledge into something that will improve the way we do things in society. So we are very, very incredibly fortunate to have with us as our moderator, Professor Vivek Goel, who is the Vice President of Research and Innovation. So he kind of, sort of knows what we're talking about here.
You have to give me the definition.
And we have with us panelists representing, and I'll let them introduce themselves if you are okay with that, or I can do the formal. Industry, sort of pseudo-government organization. Well, having never been in government and have no desire to be in government, I'd like to call it pseudo. External perspective. And Garth from NGOs, sort of a different kind of funding of translation. So with that, I know you didn't come to hear me talk. I'm going to pass things over to our moderator and say thank you all for coming.
Thanks, Joseph. So I think we'll have a little bit of a conversation amongst the panelists, and then we'll open it up to the audience. We are expecting another panelist, Chris Shipp, the Dean of Engineering, but maybe he's doing something that deans do, innovative. So maybe we'll just start by asking each panelist to say a couple of words about themselves and why they think they're here. Sandy?
So my name is Sandy Schwanger. I've met a number of you as a mentor here in the Translational Research Program, and so it's great to see some friendly faces in the audience. I am an innovator. I'm a disruptive innovator. Some people call me a pain in the ass, and that's A-okay because that's what it takes to really move the yardsticks forward. I founded my first company 22 years ago inside the walls of Hamilton Health Sciences, and then moved it out of those walls for various reasons. And then my second company in 2010. And One was my first company. My client was the pharmaceutical industry and the medical device industry. The next company was the Ontario Ministry of Health funded. So I've gone over two different areas, and I'll tell you, one is easier than the other. So I brought with me something that I'd like to read to you, which was probably one of the most impactful talks that I ever went to. It doesn't take very long for me to read, but I think it really resonated. It resonated so much with me that I actually went to the minister's office and said, can I have a copy of it? So I have the copy with me. And this comes from Dr. Eric Hoskins, and he spoke at a MedTech conference in 2015. So we're going back a few years now. But this is what he had to say. To succeed at health innovation, it demands two very special qualities. The first is courage. The second is relentlessness. You need courage because the work you do means taking risks. And you don't just accept risk, you embrace it. You use it to keep pushing yourself forward, driving towards goals and never pausing to congratulate yourself once you reach them, because other goals lie ahead. That's where relentlessness comes in. You never accept the status quo. You never say something is good enough. You constantly question how we do things. Because if the answer is, that's how we've always done it, you are the first to say, that's not good enough. Maybe, just maybe, we can do it better. There is only one way to find out, and that is to try. We have to be disruptive in healthcare, because if we're not, we are not going to move it forward.
That was nice. Yeah, thank you. So my name is Bob Bell. I'm an orthopedic surgeon by background. Had experience in innovation in CIHR funding, developing new methods for treating patients with bone cancer, and I think I get an opportunity to speak to the class about that later. Translation from the lab to actually changing treatment for patients with sarcoma. Subsequent to that, worked in leadership roles at Cancer Care Ontario, Princess Margaret Hospital, the University Health Network, and then as Deputy Minister, Minister of Health. And here's the most important thing for you. A novelist who's written the first ever novel about translational research. Amazon.ca, go on, put in hip novel. All proceeds go to sarcoma research at the Princess Margaret Cancer Foundation. Have a look at this. Buy lots for your Christmas presents. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Garth Smith. I'm the VP of Business Development and Partnerships at the Ontario Brain Institute. So the Ontario Brain Institute is an arm's length agency from the government that gets funding from government, philanthropy, and industry to drive the translation of research and commercialization to improve the brain health of Ontarians. It actually says to improve the brain health of Ontarians. And there's a number of ways to do that. There's a number of ways you could do it. My team manages the commercialization side of things. How do you help small companies grow in Ontario and then get into the Ontario healthcare system and change and be innovative and present innovation? We've supported about 77 companies in the neurotech space. And I'd say the ones that are going to get Health Canada approval and get out to market, their first sale is going to be in the US. It's not going to be in Canada. They may get one in their home institute, just because maybe the researcher was the one that did the innovation. But for them, if they get any outside investment, if they get any angel or VC, in order for them to hit their milestones for their investment, they're going to go to the US. So we are charged to change that. We're charged to make sure that there's a process by which Ontario-bred innovation is assessed, at least, given a fair shake, to be shown that if it does have value, and we're talking not pilots, we're talking about scale up across the province, if there's value for the province, that they should be implemented accordingly. So that's why I'm here.
Introductions and why you think you're here. Whoa. I'm looking right over there at Joseph.
Yeah, because he forced me to come and promised me a sandwich.
And a free book.
And a free book. So, so I'm Chris Shipp. I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science and Engineering at UofT. Previous to this, I was the Associate Vice President, International Partnerships for 2 years. And before that, I see some IBBME folks here. I was the Director of the Institute of Biomaterials and Biomedical Engineering for a few years. And for those who don't know, it's an institute that sits at the interface between 3 different faculties, and was kind of an innovation lead in the area of sort of interdisciplinary work between the basic sciences, the engineering sciences, and into the medical space. I like to think that the Faculty of Medicine sort of sees IBB as kind of their translational arm, in a sense, that group that sits literally at the table, both at basic chairs as well as clinical chairs, and sits in that space. So, so why am I here? I actually think it is Joseph's fault. One of the things that I think we've been working with Joseph over the past few years is actually around this translational research program, different strategies, and I think engineering is in a really unique place. It really focused on how we can move things forward. We've got faculty who are doing everything. I mean, you think classic engineering, think sort of like, very hardcore applied stuff and very strong, but we've got a huge focus on folks in the basic sciences, in particular in the biomedical space. What are the strategies that engineering's applying to help move these things forward? What are our accelerator strategies? What are the mechanisms that we're putting in place to help our students succeed? What are the different kind of professional programs that we've rolled out, in particular, that sit at this interface? The MEng in biomedical engineering is one of the ones we started early on that medicine actually looped in as a program inside the MD program. So students could register and do that while they were doing their MD, and use that as a kind of a translational arm for their particular program. So engineering, as I like to have said to our incoming class of 1,100 students, is that we've always had a core 8 disciplines, but we're very agile in developing and inventing new programs, certificates, strategies that cross disciplines, that bring us into other sectors. We love to pilot things in engineering and hopefully translate those out into new areas. So we see ourselves as kind of a feeder. We're kind of like the ultimate startup in a sense for doing. We love to try things. We love it when they fail, I think. I'm looking at Ben. Do we like things when they fail? Sometimes, because it tells us these are our stepping stones to other successful strategies going forward. So what's that?
And they fail fast.
Yeah, fail fast. The folks I know that when I was a director, one of the things I loved to do was spend money and roll out all sorts of different initiatives and see if they worked. If they hit, if they didn't work, we tried something different. So that's a philosophy that I'm going to try to apply into engineering now going forward. And Vivek knows that I love spending money in the AVP role as well. So stay tuned.
Okay, so maybe I'll pick up on, I think, where Garth was headed. I think we're known in this province, and particularly in the city, for the quality of our research, the quality of the trainees that come through the ecosystem, the graduates, the postdocs, and so on, by any set of metrics that you look at. But then, we're not seen as a place that is translating those ideas that are being generated into innovations that are being applied, and particularly in our own healthcare system. So, maybe we just ask the panelists to reflect on, from their experience, why they think, first of all, if that statement is true, and Bob's shaking his head, so we'll maybe start with him. And if it's not true, why it's not true, and then we'll go to the ones who might think it is true. So Bob, you want to start?
Yeah, so obviously we'll talk about examples. I'll talk about experience I had in Dubai at the Arab Health Show, which is the biggest health exposition in the world. We were there, University Health Network was attempting to sell consulting services. And I was walking through this massive convention center, and I heard someone saying, and if you implement our software, you will get the same results in blank as you get in Ontario. And I turned around, and there were a couple of guys from Ontario who were selling something called ordersets.com. what they'd done is they'd taken the great research done to develop quality-based procedures, standardized ways of caring for patients with common diseases, and they turned them into order sets. And they were marketing these order sets in the Middle East, where many trainees had come from Ontario and saw Ontario outcomes as being something they wanted to achieve. Now, they were doing reasonably well outside the country, but they weren't being marketed inside Ontario. And the Ministry of Health changed that about 4 years ago. St. Joseph's Hospital did a procurement, looked at a number of different potential order sets, picked ordersets.com, which had changed its name by that time to Think Research. And these are now rolled out pretty well across any hospital that doesn't have Epic or Cerner as their health record, where these things can be baked in. So, you know, it's actually shortened length of stay in Ontario hospitals. But more importantly for today's discussion, people now come, like people from Iceland who've recently bought these order sets, and they've seen them in use in similar hospitals here in Ontario. So the point I would make is, if you're going to innovate and if you're going to export, you have to market in your homeland. And Think Research is a great example of having done that. Other examples to talk about, but I'll hold it there for now.
Others who want to disagree on that point? Andy?
I think that we do a fantastic job in this country in innovation. We have great programs, the IRAP, the Ontario Centres of Excellence. There's a lot of earlier stage programs to help move companies along and innovate. The problem is commercialization and adoption in our healthcare system. We are in a monopsony. We have one payer, and that payer makes the decision of go, no go. And I have been working in this as the innovator, as a disruptive innovator for 10 years now. And, I know I've met with a number of you and you say, what's the path? How do we get this adopted? And I say, I've been doing this for 10 years. I couldn't tell you the path. I don't know who the people are you need to talk to. I don't know what the steps are. There's not a stone I have left unturned, but I still can't figure it out. And I think that that's one of the problems with a lot of our innovations is we don't know who is going to pay for it. Is it going to be covered by OHIP? Is it going to be covered under capital equipment? Is it going to be, where do you go? And then there's procurement. And procurement in this province is a nightmare. Value-based procurement is something that the words we're all chatting. And if you've heard of value-based procurement, some of you are shaking your heads, that's the new world. That's what we're working towards. That's what other jurisdictions are doing. But I haven't seen it put into practice yet, and that's what has been very, very frustrating for me as an innovator to try to bring a product forward. And it's not just me; it's what I hear from you and from colleagues who have some fantastic stuff, but it is not being adopted in this province, or for that fact, in this country. We have 12 systems. We have to do every single time you go into a new province, you have to start from the beginning again. So I find it incredibly frustrating and challenging. I would argue with anyone that innovating in the healthcare space is the most difficult place to innovate because we're always being pulled backwards. I use the example, how many people in this room have used Uber this month? Okay, how many people in this room have used a taxi this month? Okay, guess what? Uber won. But what we need to become the Uber. We need to move in. We have to innovate and not go backwards, right? And we need jurisdictions to adopt us. And I agree with Bob that with his example of Think Research, they started outside. They were the lucky ones who actually then got adopted into the Ontario system. But there's a lot more that just innovate here and commercialize somewhere else.
When in a great world, you wouldn't have to go to Dubai in order to hear about, Think Research. You'd have the ability to, and all the stuff that gets innovated through the universities, like it's only a small percentage that are really going to be useful for the healthcare system. But there should be a process. And I'm cheating a little bit because back in the day, Joseph asked me to mentor one of the TRP programs and thingies, and I'm going to raise it. So, and what we did was there was a project that I told them to find that process. You know, what is it? How is it? What is the process by which an innovation gets decided on? Who pays for it? How it gets implemented? How it gets reimbursed? And the two students who are in this audience right now, they went down the rabbit hole. I mean, they went deep, deep into the rabbit hole. And essentially, when they came back, they concluded, which is what everybody had already known, there really wasn't a path. And if I'm wrong about this, please speak up anytime you like. There wasn't really a path. If you are a large company that has a large lobbying, government relations, procurement team that could mobilize lots of people, if you could mobilize a patient group within the province, if you were a doctor that was a personal champion inside of a research institute, sure, maybe. But generally what happens is they go out, they make some money, they show their value, and then by some randomness, they come back and get back into the Ontario healthcare system. We've seen a lot of innovations leave the province, and I hope they come back, but we're not sure.
You want to add anything else, Chris?
Yeah, I'm not sure what, from our perspective, I guess a lot of what we're seeing, and I'm just going to use a couple of student-based examples where students have, they rolled out a capstone project and they've got this really cool idea around a strategy. And they actually raised, they went through CDL and they've bounced through the Hatchery and they've actually got my tax dollars now and they've run an Entrepreneur Accelerate grant that I'm helping to manage. So it's all looking really good. But what was interesting is that they started out as a hardware play. And they very quickly realized that it's going to be very difficult for them to raise that critical amount of dollars to roll through on the hardware side. So they've now pivoted and said, you know what, we're going to make our system work from a software perspective, where they can work with any hardware that's out there. It's a lot simpler to work. I mean, it's a device now, not a drug or something. So your analytics now are a lot simpler, a lot easier to manage. But what was interesting, and this was a discussion I had with them yesterday, they actually had a company that was really interested in the hardware space. And because they've now pivoted, they're not sure if they can go back to that company and ask the question, would you still be interested in supporting us? Because now we've gone into the software side of the shop. I think the company was very interested because they were a company that could fabricate what they were interested in from a kind of a wearables perspective. So I think this is one of the things that the students are learning, is that the challenges and from an engineering perspective, what is easier to roll out. I think the software side is something that's actually the students are finding from biomed space is actually a little bit easier to work with, at least from this device side.
So Sandy, I want to pick up on your point about we have this single pair. we have a single source of funds that actually sends it out through multiple pathways. And so I think one of the challenges I see with the kinds of innovations, particularly that students come up with, because they're thinking about, from a user perspective, how it's going to make life better. We use Uber because it makes our life better, and it's usually cheaper than the taxi option. But the challenge often in healthcare is students will have a great app, or will have someone who's going to have something that's going to reduce post-operative pain. But it's a technology it's going to benefit the patient, but who has to pay for it? And they don't see the benefit, right? And how do we get through that? So maybe it's about getting to the patient-centered experience. So, Bob, do you have a answer?
I think that's a crucial point, is that the Ministry of Health is responsible for spending taxpayer dollars wisely and spending them on things that make impact, right? Let me give you two examples. Everybody knows what an ST-MI is, ST-elevated MI. When you got crushing chest pain, the ambulance picks you up. They don't go to any emergency department. They go directly to a cardiac intervention centers. You go right to the cath lab. You don't go to the ER. You get a stent put in your heart, like Bernie Saunders had the other day. Well, that protocol was invented in the Ottawa Heart Institute. They demonstrated that if you get everything lined up if you get the EMS guys trained in reading a single lead or a single whatever it is, I'm an orthopedic surgeon talking about cardiograms, that's always difficult. If they learn to read cardiograms in the ambulance and understand what they need to do, you could save lives and make differences. That was discovered in Ottawa. It was then stepwise rolled out across this province very, very effectively, to the point where, now in this huge province, about 95% of people are close enough that they can get a stent in their heart within 90 minutes, which is the standard. Another example is a study that was done in Ontario and Alberta showing that if you have large strokes and you actually remove the clot using intra-arterial devices, you can actually reduce the damage from the clot. That study was done. It was a study completed in 2016 and 2017. It was rolled out to stroke intervention centers in this province, again with EMS taking patients, because time is brain in this situation, directly to centers. Now, these are innovations that are enormous improvements in, reducing heart failure, reducing stroke disability. These are the kind of things the ministry looks for innovations. I'll give you another example of something that maybe there's a great company in Waterloo called IntelliJoint that makes navigation software for putting total joints in perfectly. And, the ministry sees that it has benefit in revision total joints, but not in primary total joints. Primary total joints, the surgeon can do fine by themselves. In the United States, it's being marketed everywhere because it's a marketing device. You're going to have your joint put in with robotic-assisted location software. So you can charge more in the United States for that. Here, we're taking a little more, hard-hearted approach to saying it works here, doesn't work there. We'll buy your product here, but not there. So I think the ministry has an excellent health technology assessment process working through Health Quality Ontario that looks at these innovations. And when you sell to the single payer, you're selling to 14 million people. It's a big market, but the health technology assessment is really rigorous.
One of the challenges, I think, also, though, is that SMEs, when you're going into the ministry and so on, the first thing they say is, what's the economic? Show me the economics behind that. Show me that we are going to save money with this innovation or so on.
Or make patients better.
Okay. Or make patients better. But SMEs don't have access to that data, economic data. That's a challenge, and when you are trying to innovate and you're putting your dollars into marketing and sales and whatever, that is a huge amount of money that you would have to invest in. Well, we can't even get access to the data. We don't have access to OHIP data to be able to show and demonstrate economic value. That's a challenge for us.
I guess OBI is trying to help bridge that, right?
I think that one of the reasons why, so when you have doctors publishing papers as evidence for this efficacy, and then they have the ability to kind of grow this publication record, it's sort of a reporting system that is built into the research programs that small companies, even other researchers, when they do have the efficacy, it's the real challenging bit, and what was said right there is the requirements needed for what are the economic arguments for Ontario may be different from what's needed in British Columbia, may be different from the United States. And the entities that are in the pipeline for assessing technologies, everybody gives an opinion. It's hard to find out who's making the actual decisions about which technologies gets reimbursed. So, I think that, there was a recent program that, companies could pay into the program to get the data package for Ontario, given it had a large price tag, but you had the ability to pay into that, and if you showed value at the end, it was a little murky as to whether or not you were going to get a reimbursement, but what the heck? It's a first system, and you're going to be the first one through. And you know, we've known companies to go through that process, and then at the end they didn't get reimbursement, even though they showed value. And now they're stuck with a data package that's really customized for Ontario. So you know, where do they go from there? They go back to their private payers in the U.S. They go back to the United, the Kaisers of the world, and sell it to them as a marketing, yada, yada, yada. So I think that the researcher-derived innovations, you know, we've seen other research-derived innovations that require some help. But the ones coming from small companies, I think that because it's such a murky process by which things get assessed, a lot of them don't even try. They just go away and do something else. And I think that's where, like I said, if 1,000 of them go in for assessment, if 990 don't make it, fine. But at least you've been told. But if there's 10 out there that can show a track record of, and I'm talking from neurotechnology, I'm not talking about, you know, from other indications, at least have an option to get assessed, be told no or yes, and then move on with their lives, I think would be a huge improvement in what's going on right now.
You have Monty?
No. It's hard for me to kind of comment because it's sort of, I like this idea of a more robust screening system where you can kind of get that stuff evaluated early.
That's what you guys do in engineering, right?
Yeah, we just
This is
re-break
what you guys
stuff.
do, and then you beta test it, and if it doesn't work,
boom, we switch it out, right? And something that we're used to dealing with quickly.
But I think what you're talking about is you're talking about the duality of choosing technology, choosing innovative processes to improve the healthcare system and make that investment, okay? And that requires data. I mean, nobody in this room who's a taxpayer wants us to be buying technology for Ontario use. That's not effective for patients or cost effective. Then there's the other issue that you got a $65 billion industry. Should some of that be used to actually inculcate innovation in SMEs in the healthcare space? So should we actually coax along small companies to actually bring products to market that may or may not have an eventual impact on the health system, but we're going to help those along for a time? And that's a really tough one, you know, because then government's choosing winners, right? And you don't want government to choose winners. You want markets to choose winners. So that's the OCHIS, the Ontario Chief Health Innovation Strategist role that was eliminated not long ago by this new government. That was always a very questionable decision to have governments supporting innovation at a stage before it demonstrates efficacy and cost effectiveness, simply because it's made in Ontario. So it's a risky business doing that.
you don't even have to do the coaxing. I would say if you told them, go get your Health Canada approval, go get your efficacy, here are the things that you want to see for economic model for show that efficacy, that bar is fine. It's just got to tell them what that bar is. And then there's all kinds of investment vehicles, the MyTax, we would fund it. You know, I think it's too murky for them even to know what that bar is. And I don't mean for the Ministry of Health to help these small companies when they haven't shown anything. These guys have shown something. They're leaving the province, leaving the country, and selling in other countries because they've already shown their economic value and their efficacy. So if we're going to use other markets as a measure of whether or not something works, I think we're, like, as an investor, we're missing out on the founder's rate for these innovations, because when they're cheap, when it's early, that's the time to get the friends and family rate. When they go out and then they figure out how valuable they are and they come back, we're going to pay more for it. So that I don't want to do R&D with taxpayers' dollars. What I want is it's the assessment. Like when an engineering project goes into beta testing, they set pretty tight milestones and goals and what they have to hit. And if you don't hit it, go back to the drawing board. So I think clarity on that would be really nice.
Joseph, you have a question?
So, I'm hearing this discussion, and I just want to jump in and ask, is there a role for, this is self-serving, but the UofT or the university to play in this space? We have, under one faculty, more hospitals teaching and affiliated that are potential test beds of potential opportunities for procurement. How could the university possibly play as a sandbox in between innovation and government money?
You're doing that. I mean, just today there was discussion from the Piedmont Cardiac Center about the first clinical use of a holographic heart image, developed in Israel. But it could have been developed anywhere. But there are lots of ways that innovation can be brought into University of Toronto hospitals apart from the government buying them. So that's the final step. That is the final after phase 3 clinical trials. There will be policy changes directed toward implementation of innovation that is at that stage. Much earlier stage innovation is being tested in university hospitals constantly. Phase 1 clinical trials at Princess Margaret, phenogenomic trials at in the cancer centers. Those are happening just all the time. Sometimes with the drugs developed in our drug development programs. Sorry? Of one of the drugs? Yeah, there's a great example. There's TACMAC has got 2 drugs in phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials at Princess Margaret that were developed purely from philanthropy. If I think long enough, I'll even remember the pathway that they're designed to interrupting, given the name of the drugs. But he's got 2 drugs that have no commercial money in them, simply philanthropic money. As an example, the Campbell donation. You've got examples of CAMH of drugs that have been developed there and tests that have been developed there to decide which antidepressants, for example, are most effective in which patients. So there's lots of that kind of research happening that's foundational, Joseph, in the University of Toronto.
Where I think would be a really good opportunity is, that's a real, I think there has to be some sort of economics attached to these projects or some business modeling as to, as they're going through, maybe they use them as test cases as to, would this go on the PM, whatever the drug costing thing is, or the ODB. What are the economic, these are really good opportunities to all these innovations that's going on in the province to maybe test drive how to do these economic modeling to show whether or not this thing actually by some miracle sees the light of day. Is this something Ontario would spend money on in terms of paying for it? I think that's where I think would be nice under UofT.
The question I wanted to ask is, we're here talking about innovation, and we want University of Toronto to be a global player, but the discussion that's happening right now is all centered around Ontario, and I'm just kind of confused as to the scope of what we're trying to do here.
So I think maybe I'll say the reason for framing it that way is, certainly what I've seen, we hear a lot of, is when people go out globally, they'll say, have you sold your product in your own hometown? And then they can say, well, I haven't sold in my own hometown. And then say, well, if University Health Network's not ready to buy it, why should I buy it? Yeah. And so then the flip side is, you can't get in here. And so people from the start, and I think this is what Garth was saying, start to develop their work with the target of having the US market or a European market. And quite honestly, for a firm, those are larger markets too, right? And the investors want you to go there as well. So that's why you get into this thing, like, if you want to actually go global, you have to be able to start in Ontario.
The place is littered with examples of Canadian-born innovations that are gone global. And I think that especially pharma-led trials here in Ontario, because of IP rules and because of our size of our market, the size of the Canadian market, it's never going to come to Canada first. It's always market-driven.
And that's not terrible, right? Like in IBBME, you had that great example of Bob Pillier's bone ingrowth surface, right? that revolutionized the total joint replacement market. And I'm sure you've got royalties coming to the faculty from that, no? Must be.
I'm looking at Vivek. He's like,
So there must be royalties somewhere. Well, that's a mistake. But, there's also the issue of where are the distribution chains and where are the manufacturers. And in that case, they tried to do it in Canada, and the distribution just wasn't here. But, introduced a total change in the way the world treated arthritis by doing it with a company in Kentucky. So, there is global, there are global receptors for innovation that occurs in our labs, no question.
Agreements between Health Canada and FDA, so that when you go through Health Canada approvals, that makes it much easier to get the FDA approvals. Is there any advantage that way?
So as I understand it, the data that's used by the FDA is often used by Health Canada, and perhaps it passes through, especially in devices, it passes through our approval process perhaps a little quicker if it's been approved by the FDA.
Are there plans to make some agreements to make it easier rather than just using the data?
I think that the data being analyzed in the context of the Canadian healthcare system is always a smart thing, right? Because there are differences in the way the data is going to be evaluated based on our different system. But most things that are approved in devices in the United States are approved here if the manufacturer decides to bring it here. Quite often with both drugs and implants, they decide they're not going to bring it here because we're going to price it cheaper than it gets priced in the United States. So they'd rather us go through compassionate release and approval and buying it on an American price rather than a Canadian price, which is a business decision.
Yeah. So as a student, I'm just scratching the surface and understanding the practical and even the theoretical part of innovation and how to go about it. But in my understanding so far, economics has to play a big role, even in the start of innovation and when it comes to the practical steps as well, commercialization, most important of all. So what is being done to, let's say as students, to encourage us to, I would say, play around, learn more, okay? Because so far I'm just, getting depression. When it comes to innovation, okay, I come up with an idea, let's say, I'm in the final step, and it comes to commercialization. So I'm gonna, thrown back in stage one again, and I'll just give up in the end. So what steps are being taken? Because as a kid, for the kids to learn, they're given toys. If they don't play with them, they don't learn. So we should be given more opportunities to fail and learn, right? It should not be just suppressed with economy and funding.
You want to talk a little bit about what engineering's done with Hatchery and now MyHall?
Yeah.
Create an environment for students?
So that's a great question, and engineering is all about playing around a lot with stuff and trying out ideas. So engineering has what we call the Hatchery, and the Hatchery is one of these accelerator incubator spaces where primarily undergraduate driven, where students can come in, the resources are provided for them largely for free, effectively, to come in, try out ideas, build your team, and pitch to raise not huge amounts of cash to support your initiatives, but it's been a very successful model. It's very different than CDL. It's very different than computer sciences model. Engineering is very much about students just trying out stuff. We provide all the resources for them to roll out their ideas through our MyHall Center for Innovation Entrepreneurship with the fabrication spaces. We encourage our students to participate in entrepreneurial activities and learn how to create companies and fail a lot often. You'll get a lot of serial kids that are trying ideas and don't work. There's at least 3 IBB people sitting here who might be able to comment as well on their experience with the Hatchery or with that kind of an environment. But yeah, we've created a very open environment for students to try out things. one of the things we've done really well, I think, is actually a lot of our programs have these capstone design courses where they're often given a challenge. You talked a little bit about the drone delivery of vaccines. I remember one of the capstone courses in BME in fourth year was the last mile problem and keeping things cold, and into areas where that last mile involved like a 6-hour canoe ride and that kind of stuff. And the students actually came up with a strategy around refrigeration that didn't require cooling in a sense to do it. And so they would come up with these strategies and they would actually convert those into companies and then roll them through the Hatchery out of their undergraduate capstone courses. So they were actually, they self-identified a problem, they ran it, it was a course, and then they would roll that up into a company, or at least try it into a company.
So H2I is trying to do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Medicine and also trying to connect, people who might have ideas in the health sciences with engineering students who can help solve it. So, I think we're trying to create those opportunities within the university for students to experiment and learn.
But the health space is a little different.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because frankly, you can't just play without thinking
Yeah.
experiment with patients.
Yeah, and I think it depends on what we're playing in a sense. I mean, I'm going to talk about some of the engineering things are their assays, their diagnostic devices, their micro patterns in a 96-well plate so you can increase high content. So these are things which are enabling platforms for the healthcare space, but they're not a drug delivery system.
We don't have that.
Right.
We actually in medicine don't have a sandbox to
Play in our sandbox.
play in like that. But also, things in healthcare take so much longer. So as an undergrad, if you start, you're probably going to be postdoc by the time you start on clinical trials.
It's not that. I mean, there is a sandbox. It's just a very expensive sandbox, right? So I can't say this enough. There hasn't been a better time to be a startup or an entrepreneur in Ontario and Canada right now. Like there's so many incubators and mentors and people that are there to help you out. But it's not easy. It's not gonna get handed to you. Entrepreneurship, startup, people starting up companies, it'll age you faster than anything in the world. It'll make you depressed. It'll give you euphoria in the same day. So it's hard. And you just, economic modeling, you got to go learn economic modeling. No one's going to come up to you and say, hey, I'm going to really do that economic modeling for you. You have to go get into Google, learn how to do economic modeling, find out the 3 real important questions you need to ask about your technology and economic modeling, then go find a partner and go do it. And then you got to beg them to do it for free because you have no money. That's day 1. Day 2 is figuring out whether or not the results mean anything. It's one step in 1,000 you have to do. And then your technology is going to pivot because 80% of stuff pivots and you never see why you actually invented it till about 3 years into it. And then the pivot's going to change. How you do your economic model is going to change. So I can't begin to tell you how good it is right now within UofT, outside of UofT, to be someone starting up a company or building technology because everything is there. You just really need to just do it.
Hi. Hi, I had a question. It revolves around provincially implemented health services. So also myself, as a student, if I were to come up with a bunch of other students with some sort of healthcare innovation that's patient-centered and I wanted it implemented provincially, I think often the most inaccessible space for students is government and just the provincial aspect as a whole. So could any of you maybe speak to examples in which students have been able to find different avenues or pathways in which they're able to get discussions with ministry officials or so forth? That would be very helpful.
Well, right.
Well, we'll both maybe have different thoughts on this. As a student, you're also, as an SME, it's the same thing that I said earlier. And we talked about the rabbit hole that you go down. There is no clear path for this side, the innovator, to go through. There's no door that you can knock on. I think we tried with the OCHIS was a really interesting start, which is now, of course, it doesn't exist anymore. But there was a vision there at one point. But there is no particular route that we can go through. And I think, Garth, you had mentioned that maybe government relations groups in the large companies. I sit on a board for MedTech Canada, and I sit with all the CEOs of all the big companies, Philips, GE, Medtronic, you name it, I'm with them. They are also struggling with those exact same things, because I will turn to them and say, how are you managing to get through this? And they can't, they face exactly the same thing. I just think that it's a very circuitous route to get anywhere, and I left my breadcrumbs every route I go, and I can't find the right doors. So I don't know, Bob, if you have some thoughts on how to navigate the healthcare system more effectively.
So there is a very well-defined way that you get innovation into the Ontario health system. You make, if something has Health Canada approval, you then bring it to, Health Quality Ontario's health technology assessment, and there are literally hundreds of those assessments done every year. And, devices, not drugs. Drugs are assessed a different way that we can talk about. But devices, innovations, new processes are assessed by this health technology process. And, if they're effective, they tend to get funded. Now, are students involved in that? Well, there are lots of students who are actually doing rotations at Health Quality Ontario to learn about that. And that's a way to learn about it. In terms of understanding what you need to know, I'm sure, Joseph, you got aspects in this course related to utility measurement, quality adjusted life years, for example, how you actually describe issues in your technology that can be used in measuring cost effectiveness and effectiveness. I mean, again, these aren't magic. These are scientific ways of describing what things do. So there is a process here. Now, if you don't have that data, right, that you're able to go to HQO and say this is something that meets your criteria for innovation that's going to be effective and cost effective, then the question is, should we have an incubator function present somewhere in the Ministry of Health that allows that to occur? And that's a good question. We used to have it a little bit. It was starting to develop. We don't have it anymore. It's a good question as to whether or not we should have that with a $65 billion budget.
So if I could just add on a specific example, if you go on the UofT Entrepreneurship website, you'll find listings of companies that have gone through that are all created by students at the University of Toronto. It's a large proportion of health. Not every company on there is still in operation, because that's the whole point. But you will find successful companies that are now operating in Ontario and globally that were started by students. I'll give you one example. Ryan Doherty was a student, I don't know if you've ever had him here, developed a website called iamsick.ca. And it, I think they ultimately got the ministry interested. But it was like a 5-year journey. And it goes back to the courage, relentlessness remarks that Sandy opened with. And I mean, he himself felt that when he was a student here, it was challenging to find health services of a particular type when you needed it. So he started by just creating a Google map that laid out all the health services around the university campus and the various healthcare organizations, and then started to try to sell online booking to doctors. And we won't spend time talking about how challenging that can be, because that means having the companies that sell them their office systems interface with his product. He developed an e-prescribing tool that's built into it, but he can't get that sold because Canada Health Infoway has its own e-prescribe it, and they have the market for that. But he has been able to get it sold. It initially was being picked up by some of the LHINs. Waterloo Wellington was the first LHIN to adopt it. So for their entire region, they were using his platform to show what was available. So it's a long story, and it does involve perseverance. And I give that example also because that's something that didn't require Health Canada or it was an online tool, right? And it just improves processes.
To add to his story, at the same time, he was working on his PhD in the Faculty of Medicine. While doing this for a number of years, he was chasing funding to employ people at the same time. So I would argue that actually, as a student or a trainee, you actually have unique opportunities to open doors that normally those of us that are older may not have. How much does that company work? How much does that company work?
Still private, so I couldn't tell you, but he is in revenue now, so it's taken him a long time. So Joseph's right. Most of it was on the side of his desk while he was still doing his PhD.
First of all, thank you very much. Very diverse and intelligent panel with a lot of experience. You brought up patient order sets and now called Think Research. So the innovator, founder, CEO, Dr. Chris O'Connor, he started off and he actually formulated the company basically on the TRP principles. He found that there was a need. He tested the need. He went and developed. He tested it again. He went and assessed the need again. He applied it, and he had impact. If you speak to him, and I'm sure people here know him as well, he'll say a lot of it was luck. A lot of it was timing. A lot of it was luck. A lot of it is who he knows and the situations that he could develop around his idea and what the impact is. It is a sad situation that it was difficult to adopt in Ontario and Canada, and there is elsewhere. I think now he's in Ireland as well. So, to sum it up, the question I have here is, in the TRP program, in the TRP thinking, we seem to be in this discussion here saying something and we're skirting the elephant in the room. So how can we disrupt to get, as Sandy had mentioned, the process is challenging. There is no formula. We know that as innovators and we know that as disruptors. But how can we make it easier, more open, so that disruptors and innovators don't necessarily have a blueprint, but aren't banging their head on day 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, but actually they're opening the doors, and if they choose to bang their head on a new door, that's their choice, but then there's a pathway that is laid out maybe in sand, not in concrete. So we're all here, we're intelligent people from different backgrounds. Who and how can we disrupt that process and pathway to make it more applicable to Canadians and Ontarians to be innovators here and keep it here and then go elsewhere?
I'm going to use your example of Chris, right? Because first of all, he surrounded himself with professional management at an early stage. They did the market evaluation. They saw the market in Ontario that was most ripe for disruption was clinical documentation and long-term care, where you had people who didn't speak English, who couldn't write English. So they developed point-click care, right, where you could actually just click on the patient's conditions without necessarily understanding English. And of course, that model of folks who are immigrants who are looking after people don't necessarily is prevalent in the United States and other countries as well. So point-click care is a great product. It's one of their primary products now. And the next thing he did was to look at the problems in our system around wait times, And with the ocean system, he's responding to issues in the market. And if you respond to issues in the market with great innovation, you're going to succeed. And I believe that they've done that in a very unique way at Think Research. This is why they're one of our best health innovators. They're just good.
So maybe maybe there's a website that could show you the path, that would help with the show you who and where and how that process works. Thank you.
Self-identify as the two students that Garth was referring to earlier. Robbie and I are former TRP students, and we actually developed a process map, routine model that actually helps health innovators navigate the healthcare system to more successfully implement care in Ontario, or at least to help them make better and more informed decisions as they're looking through these pathways and processes on which avenue to take when they're making these types of decisions. So who your payer is,
where they're playing and who and what to access and what. You can choose your own adventure. So just to plug it, it's higher.ca, HIIO.ca. It's a little out of date with all the ministry changes. So we're updating it as we can, but stuff's still ambiguous. And one of the things that I wanted to add about your comment in terms of, what do we do, for kind of skirting around this elephant in the room about change. It's a massive cultural shift. We're in a very segmented, fragmented system, and it's really working toward partnerships and allies. And I don't think we've gotten there yet. And it's the unwillingness and lack of understanding of each other that really hinders us from working together and achieving these common goals to more successfully implement here. So I think, the technical functional aspect is really important, but we also need to recognize the culture and the, change management that needs to be in place as part of that.
So it's government, industry, everyone kind of working together. There's two things we came across that might be of interest. The first is that H2O only does 10 to 12 health technology assessments a year. The second is that they like to remain agnostic to vendors. So if you are a single vendor, like super disruptive innovation, and there's only one of you out there, you're less likely to get put through until there's more. You either want to love your company or there's more options. Yeah.
Okay.
So I guess I wanted to say that I'm just wondering with Canada, I guess, what is our issue? For example, like, it's not related to health, but entertainment industry, for example. We have a lot of big celebs here that were signed into state because we didn't sign them, and now they're making money. And it seems like it's also manifesting in healthcare, whereas our innovation is not. People innovating here are now leaving because we're not signing. So I guess I'm just wondering if it has something to do with maybe our government if we are stuck in our traditional ways of doing things, and therefore it's affecting prioritization of where our money goes. And we are not, maybe the country is not jumping on the current trends in health. And so now we are behind. The people want to move forward, but our government is maybe still in their old ways. And so it's hard now that the people are here and maybe the government is here and is sort of maybe slowing us down. I don't know if that's a possibility, but I'm just thinking maybe if that's the issue, that could be a potential issue.
And I'd like to just jump on that a little bit, and with my colleague here to my left, and the question would be around that. This is you. So is physicians, and my question for you, two things, is in negotiations between the OMA and the ministry. Industry is never part of those. They're really not part. Of course, they're not part of those discussions. But what do you feel? Is it possible that some innovations are not brought forward because the representatives from the OMA do not want to see them brought forward, because perhaps it might impact, or it's getting into their wheelhouse, and it might impact their bottom line?
Yeah, that's interesting, Sandy. So first of all, let me say there's been an enormous sea change. In my opinion, there will never again be a negotiated settlement between the Ontario Medical Association and the government. Each one of them is going to go to arbitration, just like nurses go to arbitration. But that's interesting because that's introducing evidence-based approaches with an intelligent arbiter who now looks at the evidence presented by both sides. And one of the things that's coming out of that is appropriateness, right? Because I think you're starting to focus on appropriateness. Appropriateness now definitely is in the wheelhouse of the OMA and the government in deciding how the system will be paid for through billings. And there's a lot of work that's going on in that regard. But you're absolutely right that if doctors don't want to do something, chances are they won't do it. Now, having said that, doctors are incredibly innovative at bringing forward new things to do. Great example, Toronto is the world center of innovation in organ transplantation, right? We really are. And that was introduced by doctors down the street from here. And new billing codes were introduced to help them provide the innovation by the Ministry of Health. as well as new funding mechanisms for the hospital work that was being done, simply because this innovation was so spectacular and demonstrated such remarkable outcomes. So when you're dealing with things at the margin, it's tough. When you're dealing with penicillin, it gets recognized very, very quickly, I think, in this province.
Make a comment about the leakage to the U.S., which, as you noted, happens in a lot of domains, right? I mean, that's something that is unique to Canada pretty well, that not too many other economies in the world have to face. We've got an economy 10 times our size, with a relatively porous border, even with Trump there. Particularly for Canadians, you can go and work under NAFTA or whatever it's called today. Most people can go and work and take their entrepreneurship there. It's the same language, right? So, Chris and I have been to Israel, to Korea, which it's much more challenging for their entrepreneurs to pick up and leave because it's across an ocean, it's language barriers, and so on. And so I think we've got an added challenge here if we want to actually grow our products. And I think that does speak to the ministry probably should be doing more to ensure that becomes an if you're going to face 5 years of challenge getting into the Ontario health care system, where you can hop on a plane and fly to the Valley and move something forward much faster, it's a lot easier for our entrepreneurs to do that step.
You know, at the same time, Vivek, we have an advantage in that you make one sale. If you're going to sell a new device, a new whatever, to 14 major insurance companies in the U.S., to each hospital independently. Here you've got a degree, some innovators like working here because of the fact.
Ben?
Yeah.
If someone's selling a new implant, are they doing one sale in Ontario?
They will eventually do that.
Eventually, but right now they don't.
So do they do it initially? So the answer.
You have the orthopedic surgeon on board, right?
They have to get the orthopedic surgeon on board. So, having developed implants at Mount Sinai Hospital, there are implants that are developed here. They get marketed through American distributors and manufacturers. But, there's a shaving of royalty that comes here. I mean, there's profit that accrues to us. And certainly there is the benefit to innovators of seeing their work in human.
But my point is that you usually have to sell it at the hospital level, and whereas in the U.S. you can actually now start selling to large chains and get a much larger market right off the bat.
Oh, absolutely.
With a device.
Bigger market.
So I think that the fact stuff goes to the U.S. is just market, right? I think that's fine. From our perspective, if you're trying to fund companies and have them stay in Ontario or Canada, you're actually doing them a disservice. So the venture capital market in healthcare and engineering is pretty good, tech it's pretty good, but for healthcare, it's just not, you can count how many early stage VCs there are in one hand in for Canada. So they're gonna go, just accept it, move on. What you want is, if that entrepreneur wants to go do a second thing, you want them to come back, start something new, and stay a little longer down the food chain, a little longer. Eventually, they're going to go back to somewhere else. And then when they do their third thing, they're going to come back, take another thing, maybe hire 20 of you, take it down a little further. That's what Boston had to do. That's what San Diego had to do. Little increments as they went along until they actually did it. That's just the reality of it. Having said that, we were lucky enough to go to Denmark and, on a trip, and showed how their healthcare system leverages local technology to help their healthcare system. And it's phenomenal. Like, it's ridiculously cool. One example they gave us was, instead of making everybody do one EMR system, electronic medical record system, what they did was they contracted a local company to help compile, integrate the 7 EMRs that were being used across the country. So everybody, they said to the EMR companies, just keep doing what you're doing. We're going to set some standards. you can choose to follow those standards and have a way easier way of getting reimbursed and get paid, or you could just fight us for the rest of your lives. That's fine. And amazingly, all 7 companies adopted the standards, and they have a nice little layer on top of all those EMRs, and that was a local company. And I remember meeting this company and asked them all the questions. How many people are you hire? When did they come and engage with you? How? And it was just an amazing story of this small company going through all the growing pains with their Ministry of Health. And now they're looking to sell their product around the world. So it's this done locally first, and then now they've proven their test case. Now they're going to go externally. Their patient portal company that does their stuff in Copenhagen, in Denmark, was pretty cool. So the market's important, but again, there's things you can do to help keep innovations in the province, prove it out, get it at the dirt rate price, and then export it out.
So I'm getting a signal that it's time to wrap it up. So maybe just to close off, and first of all, I know we've been probably a little bit depressing, but I want to pick up on the point that it is a great time to be doing this type of stuff in this city and in this province. And I think a lot of the experiences that you're hearing from, that people are describing, are from people that started 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And our ecosystem has truly evolved. This program didn't exist, Joseph, 5 years ago? This program didn't exist 5 years ago. We have entrepreneurs like Sandy who've done 2 companies. So we have people that have built up those companies that are here and are now ready to invest in new companies. And so it is a great time to be doing what you're doing, but there are still challenges and experiences to learn from. So I want to thank our panelists for sharing things so bluntly and clearly, and thank all of you for your attention, and thanks for organizing this, Joseph.
Thanks, Peter.